Lord Mayor, councillors, I feel absolutely ashamed. I've been carrying a lot of shame, particularly since I met a woman in Manchester who has experienced Yarlswood. We are on day 5 of the 16 days of activism on violence against women and girls. Last weekend, we saw in Manchester our annual march against gender-based violence. And on that march were women who have suffered violence by multiple hands, including the violence by our government in these detention centres, particularly Yarlswood. I carry this sense of shame partly because I attended this event by Women for Refugee Women. At the event, there was the launch of a report that Women for Refugee Women have done following the Shaw report to see whether or not the adults at risk policy that the Shaw report recommended is being implemented. And in fact, what they found was absolutely shocking. They found that 85% of the women surveyed who are survivors of sexual and gender-based violence. And according to the adult at risk policy, they should not be in any detention centre. 85% of those women have been trafficked into slavery or prostitution, forced into marriage, and they're being routinely detained. All of the women said they were depressed. 88% of the women said their mental health had deteriorated since being put in detention. Almost half had committed suicide, and they also found that pregnant women are being detained. According to the policy, a pregnant woman should not be detained. This torture exacerbates the abuse and violence women have experienced. It is completely inhumane. We call I call on the Council to support this motion and to act immediately to ensure the Shaw recommendations are implemented in practice, and to end detention altogether and move to community-based alternatives focusing on support and engagement that are humane and more effective and, as we've heard, less expensive. In the meantime, we call on the government to implement the recommendations that campaigners such as These Walls Must Fall, Women for Refugee Women and Set Her Free have been calling on, to implement a proactive screening process to ensure those who are vulnerable and are identified before detention. They should not be in detention, so they should not be detained. They should implement the stated presumption against the detention of survivors of sexual and gender-based violence and other vulnerable people. They should introduce an absolute exclusion on the detention of pregnant women. Pregnant women should not be in detention centres. And they should introduce that 28-day time limit whilst we wait for a change of process here. They should stop detaining people whilst their asylum claims are in progress. And they should implement a monitoring framework and accountability mechanism for detention reform. So I call on this Council to support this motion and also to force the government to actually abide by the recommendations of the Shaw report. Thank you.